Who needs a $1,000 commercial mower when something like this will do nicely? No self-propel to worry about, wheels not locking up keeping you from pulling it backwards, no holes in grass bags to worry about either, and definitely no throttle lever to get stuck. If you really want a headache when getting your mower ready for the season after a long storage period, look somewhere else, because I don't think this mower is going to need that much to get ready for another mowing season, unlike some of the larger ones. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Craftsman branded lawnmower, and the problem is that I just got it out of the warehouse and I'm not really sure what's wrong with it. However, it's probably a good guess that it won't start, otherwise why would someone give it away? Of course, it could have other issues with it, but since this is just a simple mower, there's really not that much that can go wrong with it. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be a little different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it and I'll be glad to answer your questions. So on first inspection, I noticed that the pull rope guide looks really strange. I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to look like this. Now I'm going to think about it for a bit and try to figure out what's going on with it. Now the next thing I want to do is to check the fluids for this mower and see what we're working with, and it looks like the fuel tank is completely bone dry, which is the way I prefer to find them. Now from my personal experience, if I'm going to leave a mower unused for a really long time, it's much better to have nothing in the fuel system. Now hopefully the oil is not the same way, otherwise we may have picked up someone else's junk. Also, when checking the oil, make sure you wipe off the dipstick first, that way you get an accurate reading. Now according to the color of the oil that's on this paper towel, it's not that bad. The issue though is that the dipstick is only sampling the top portion of the oil, so this is not the best way to check it. Now the good news is that it looks to be full, however for some reason the color is much better looking than from when I checked it a little earlier. It should look about the same, but it doesn't, so I'm a little concerned as to what's going on with it. Now at this point there's not much else we need to do, so I think it's time to see if the engine will start and run after putting some fuel into the carb's throat. So luckily it started and ran for a few seconds, which means the time we put into this project is going to be worth it. But what if it didn't start and run? What do we do then? Unfortunately, it means we have to do more testing to find out if we have a working ignition system or if we have enough compression from the engine. Oh, and I did figure out what was going on with this guide. So first off, it was put back on the handle in the wrong orientation, and secondly, it was bent out of shape for some reason. Now I don't end up bending it back into shape until later on once I remember what it's supposed to look like, but it was just odd that it was out of shape in the first place and that it was put back on incorrectly. Now even though the air filter looks pretty dirty, I wouldn't have an issue putting this one back on. It would have to be packed with dirt, grass, and probably wet with oil before I threw it away, but I will let you know that I will be replacing it with a new one right before I sell it. Now on these Ready Start systems from Briggs, it's important that you check and make sure that the choke flap is not stuck and that it's closed when the engine is cold. As you can see on this one, it's not stuck and it's moving just like it's supposed to, but if yours is stuck, you can try and spray carb cleaner at the bottom of the pivot and it should eventually free up. Now I'm also taking off this engine cover so that it makes filming just a bit easier, however you don't really need to at this point. So I've decided that I'm not going to take the carb off just yet. Instead, I'm going to remove the fuel bowl first, and the reason is I want to inspect its condition and then decide if I need to take the carb off for a full service. Now the bowl nut also doubles as the fuel jet, and it helps to get fuel from the bowl through the carb and into the engine, and luckily it doesn't look that bad. After getting the bowl off the carb, you can see that not only is it dry, which is good news, but that it's also very clean and only has a small amount of residue in it. Now the other item I need to check is that the float is not stuck and that it has a full range of movement, paying special attention to the upper part of its travel. This will give me an idea if the needle seat is swollen. The reason why is because if the seat is swollen, it's not only going to reduce the fuel flow into the carb, but it could also cause it to leak and flood the engine with gasoline. Now this one looks good, so I'm not worried about the seat. Now from the condition of the bowl nut and also the bowl itself, I think the carb is in very good condition and that I won't need to remove the carb for a full service. Instead, I'm just going to clean the bowl of any residue and then clear the openings in the fuel jet. Now you can use whatever piece of small diameter wire you have on hand, or if you don't have some, I would use the wire tie from your bread bag. After clearing the openings in the jet, it's best to spray some carb cleaner in the openings as well to blow out the rest of the clog. Now you can use compressed air if you want to, but be very careful, otherwise you might get something in your eye. Now if you don't want to try and clean the carb and want a much better chance of getting your mower back up and running again, then I would just replace the carb with either an OEM one or an aftermarket one, which will be a fraction of the price when compared to the OEM one. Now, I've had a lot of great carbs from the aftermarket with only a small handful of them needing a slight adjustment to get them to work. Once the bowl is back on the carb, we now have to check to make sure it's not going to leak. I know it sounds strange, but since we had to take the bowl off and because we touched the float, there's a slim chance that something might go wrong. That means before we do anything else, we need to put a small amount of fuel into the tank and check for a leak at the carb, so try not to fill it up, otherwise you might have to deal with a lot of gasoline coming from the tank. Now this might take a few minutes, so you'll have to be patient. In fact, if you have something you need to do for the next few minutes, it would be a better use of your time instead of just staring at the carb, unless that's what you really want to do. Fortunately for us, this one is not leaking, so we'll start to put everything back onto the engine. Now, one of the reasons why I don't change the air filter until later on is just in case the carb is leaking fuel. It could ruin the new filter, so instead I just use the old one until I can confirm that the carb won't leak and ruin it. Now, you might think that if you got a new carb, its chances of leaking fuel would be zero, but there's always a slim chance that it might. So even if I'd replace this one with a new one, I'd still do the same check only because it makes sense. Now, if you didn't know this, the dirtier the air filter is, the more fuel the engine is going to use, and the restriction in the airflow in the engine will also reduce the power the engine can make. And besides, these air filters are still very affordable, especially considering the issues you could have if you never change it. Also, if you know your engine is going to last for the next couple years, I would just buy a 3-pack of filters for not much more than if you bought a single. Now, since this is a very simple basic mower, there are no levers to engage with for the choke or the throttle system. That's the advantage of these simple mowers. Less complications mean less hassle, and if you really don't like to take care of your equipment, then having a machine that's not very complicated is just right for you. All you have to do is put oil in it once and then use the best oil you can afford until that mower stops working one day. After that, go buy yourself another simple mower and repeat the process. And also, don't forget to put that old mower on the curb with a sign that says free on it, or you can post it up online. That way, even if you can't fix it, it'll give someone else who can an opportunity to give it a second chance of being useful again. Now, even though this is a very simple mower, there are a few things that you can do to make sure it works the best it can. As you just saw, I removed the blade so I can sharpen it. That'll make mowing the yard a lot easier on the mower and of course you. I also sprayed some lube into the brake cable, that way it'll have less of a chance of binding up and breaking in the future. Also, even though one oil change a year after you get the mower out of the box will help to extend its life, doing it repeatedly year after year will make sure it's going to outlast a new battery mower indefinitely. So even after a basic carb service, it started with no issues on the first pull, mind you, which is pretty good for an auto choking system. Now I do want to make sure it's still going to start up once the engine is no longer cold. Just as expected, it started right back up with no real issues at all. I will say that the Briggs auto choking system and thermostat bypass always seems to work very well in comparison to some of the other brands. That's why when I need a reliable mower that's easy to maneuver, a Briggs like this one on a deck with large rear wheels is a fantastic choice, and that's coming from someone who has a Honda mower, so that's quite the statement to make. Now, since the engine is somewhat hot now, the last thing we need to do before we start mowing with it is to of course dump out the old oil and see just how bad it really is. Now, if you remember, it looked pretty good on the dipstick, but once out in the pan, you can see that it doesn't look even close to what I thought it might be. In fact, it's so bad that I'm going to flush the engine to try and get out all of the bad oil and any heavy materials from the bottom of the engine. Now, if you decide to do this kind of flush, you need to make sure to get all of it out because in past videos, even though I thought all the oil was out of the engine, after opening it up, it turns out there's about 3 to 4 ounces still in there. So it turns out you cannot get all the oil out by tipping it over. Also, after flushing the engine, you'll need to let it sit in the sun for about an hour or so to try and let the engine air out before putting the new oil in it. The reason why is because if you don't, you could contaminate the new oil, but then again, this is your mower or your project, so do what you want with it. Now, as you can tell, there was still quite a lot of stuff left at the bottom of the engine that didn't come out the first time I dumped it, and it will always be there until you flush the engine. Now, I do not typically do this flush very often. In fact, I don't even do it to my personal mower, and that's because I change the oil on a regular basis. Now this one, however, you can tell it did not seem to have regular oil changes, so it definitely needed it. So very recently, I've gotten some very interesting questions about the oil I use. Now to be honest, I just keep using the same oil bottle and keep refilling it, and that's because I buy my oil in bulk. So instead of trying to pour oil from a very large container, I'll pour it into the same bottle that I've used for quite some time. That way it's much easier to handle. Now you can use whatever oil you want because it's your mower, but I would recommend at least looking at your manual to find out what you should be putting into it. Now some engines want a very specific type of oil while others really don't even say, so it is important to at least find out. Now some might ask for a very specific weight of oil while others might ask for a certain brand of oil, but in the end it is your choice as to what you want to do. Now as you can see, I'm also going around the mowing deck and lubricating all the height adjusters. Not that it really matters because some owners don't ever change the height of their decks. But since I'm not sure where someone is going to set their deck height, I'm going to make sure they're not stuck and easy to use. Now any type of light oil will do, so don't get hung up on it having to be whatever it is I'm using. The brand really isn't that important, although I have thought about getting a different brand because of cost. Now the future owner of this mower may never ever change the mowing height, but if they do, at least I don't have to worry about them being stuck. Of course, I'm going to sell this mower, and not because I don't like it. In fact, I'd keep it and use it if I needed one, but I like the one I have right now, so I've got to pass this one on to the next person. Now nothing beats the simplicity of a basic mower. They're typically very light, so they're easy to use, and with no self-propel, you don't have to worry about a drive cable or the drive belt or even gears. That means the chances of it having issues with it are a lot less than if you had something on there that could fail in the first place. So what's the issue with just pushing around a self-propel mower that doesn't work? The answer is its weight. You see, most mowers that have self-propel, a blade clutch, or even other accessories weigh more than one without all that stuff. The heavier the mower, the harder it is for you to use, especially when the self-propel stops working. You not only have to deal with the extra weight, but there's also some drag from the self-propel, the gears, and the axles. So using a self-propel mower as a push mower is just pretty tough to do, so that's why you'll find some self-propel mowers have had their failed transmissions removed to try to make them lighter and easier to use. So why go through all that trouble and instead just get a mower that doesn't have all that baggage to begin with? Who knows, you might just realize that a simple mower is easy unless you like being difficult. So my question is, would you ever get a basic mower to replace the one you have now? I know some would say they need self-propel, but have you ever tried using one before? You never know, you might just like it. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.